And next up will be a very interesting one from Simo Hosio on crowdsourcing for precision well-being. And we'll be very happy to take questions for both the speakers at the end of this talk. Simo is a social computing scientist with a background rooted in ubiquitous computing and HCI. Simo was appointed as an associate professor in the Gen Z strategic profiling team at the University of Oulu in 2020, and he currently focuses on crowd computing and on co-creation. Through his research, he investigates and develops interactive means for orchestrating the inherent intelligence of large numbers of people, which is very interesting for all of us alike, I'm pretty certain. And he tends to do this for applications in decisions or creativity support and for digital health solutions. Thanks a lot, Simo, for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing you share some of your recent work.
Thanks for the invitation and thanks for the introduction. And also thank you to Olga. That was a really nice introduction to a platform that seems very sophisticated. And partially, I think it's flying under the radar of the community still. So I'm expecting big things in the future from your platform. It's very interesting stuff. But I'm going to share my screen. That probably helps in showing the mandatory slideware. So just bark in the chat if you see my screen. Do you see the bird?
Yep.
All right. So before we get started about precision well-being, I wanted to share a little personal story on why this area interests me and why I'm trying to sort of consolidate my thinking, what the crowds can do under this precision well-being theme. So back in the summer of 2016, I was spending the summer in Tokyo, at the University of Tokyo, doing a sort of research exchange. And when I returned home in Finland, I lost my ability to basically use my joints very well. And an owl is a nice bird in a sense that it can turn its head like 360 degrees like that. And I got to experience a state of health where I couldn't literally turn my head anymore. So all my joints became very stiff. And blood tests came back as if there's nothing wrong with my body. None of the medical specialists could come up with any sort of meaningful diagnosis. And then we ended up in a sort of compromise solution, which is very common these days, that, okay, here is prescription strength NSAIDs for you, and eat those until you die, basically. So we get inflammation medicine, nothing helps, end of story, and you're finished. So I ate those pills for a couple of months, and then I started like a radical self-experimentation period in my life. So I tested everything. I went to all sorts of woo-woo medical solutions, including taking ice baths, trying meditation, trying yoga, trying a lot of different types of diets. But the key here being that none of these sort of solutions or things that I tried, they are not recommended by doctors, but they are recommended by community members. They're coming from people who are suffering from similar things than you, and they're documented in a random mess in online forums. Then after some months, I found what helps for me. So it's basically avoiding sugar and eating within a pretty heavily constrained time window, which is basically time-restricted eating and avoiding sugar. Again, my doctors wouldn't say that this can work because it can't possibly work when you read the medical literature. It's got nothing to do with my condition, which is basically psoriatic arthritis, but it's not visible in any tests. And this is really like, you can do things to improve your condition when you get access to community knowledge, which doesn't conform to the traditional rules how epidemiologic research is done and what ends up in this sort of commonly accepted population level medicine. So this led me into this idea that I'm trying to think about precision well-being, which essentially means that we're trying to come up with ways for groups of people to feel better about themselves. My home nest is the University of Oulu. I come from Center for Ubiquitous Computing and Center for Life Course Health Research. University of Oulu looks like this. It's actually a pretty nice place during the summer, but right now we're again in remote mode. So when I look out the window, this is what I see. We have a lot of snow, and this is my backyard now. What I'm about to talk during the next 20 minutes essentially is something like this. So I do not have this well thought out as a plan or as a research agenda or as a documented results. What I'm trying to explain here is my way of thinking how we can start leveraging the crowds and through which scientific methods so that we can foster this idea of precision well-being, which I already briefly explained my idea about that. So we try to find ways to heal a community through the community knowledge rather than commonly accepted medical interventions, because they don't work. When I say they don't work, I mean they don't work on a population level. And this is not, this has nothing to do with bad mouthing the medicine as a field or sort of medical doctors work. We do all of this in smooth collaboration with the MDs, with the medical faculty at the University of Oulu and elsewhere. But the acknowledged fact is that population level treatments are extremely rare. We have a lot of chronic conditions in the planet right now where there simply exist no population level treatments. Then there's the trend that was largely pushed forward by Obama et al., which is the sort of trying to really engineer personalized medicine approaches. So we try to come up with some solutions, mainly based on genomic engineering and genomics in general, to single individuals. But we have 7.8 billion people on this planet. This is also not a very viable option. And what actually happens with us humans is that our physiology fluctuates. So if something works for me today, I may be a false positive. And then I end up as a responder in the papers or in the scientific papers, basically. And the next time it doesn't work for me anymore. So it turns out that this personalized medicine is not a panacea either. We can't fix everything through this. So as with everything, there seems to be this compromise now emerging, which is precision medicine. We try to tailor the ideal solutions for groups of people instead of everyone or single individuals. And therefore, what I'm thinking that we might as well do the same for well-being. And now here's the key difference. Now, I'm not skilled enough. I'm a silly HCI researcher dealing with, let's say, a bit more lightweight things. I would feel bad saying that we are doing this for medicine, because when we're talking about medicine, then we start talking about curing the cancer or curing really like some kind of diseases that you're born with and that may be lethal. But what I'm more interested in is in this concept of well-being, which is more about maintaining also your health, just trying to have a better quality of life in general. And well-being is also something that everybody needs, whereas medicine is something what you need when you actually are sick. So well-being is more inclusive, and it's just personally more fun topic to work with than this very hardcore medicine. I started with medicine, but then I actually emailed or sent a Twitter DM to Ujwal saying that, okay, let's change it to well-being, because like I said, I'm just trying to consolidate my thoughts here. So I'm more happy with the word well-being, which consists of comfortable, healthy, and happy. We all want to be comfortable, healthy, and happy. This kind of research is just nice to do. So formulating this as an engineering problem, how are we going to go about engineering comfort, health, and happiness? Can we develop solutions that rely on some kind of information infrastructure, interactive computer systems, software, whatever, to try to engineer comfort, health, and happiness to all of our lives? And these are all under the umbrella of well-being. Now, quick break. Think about your own well-being right now, and hit the Zoom chat, just 1 to 10. How well are you right now? What do you think about this? Just quickly shoot something in the chat. Okay, we have a bunch of numbers going on, and it seems that everyone is fairly happy today, or very doing well, let's put it this way. Now, I did this just so that you have to think about it a bit. So after all, we're academics. So here is how we define well-being in the academic lingo. It's notoriously difficult to define, but some sort of a unifying definition would be so that it's the sort of equilibrium between resources and challenges in your life. All of us, every single one of you, and also me, we have different resources in our lives, which can be psychological, social, or physical, but also at the same time, those also can be challenges in our lives. Now, if we want to start engineering an approach that all of these need to be better, how would we go about doing this? The way that I see it in my head, and also connecting it to the overarching theme of my research and also this talk, which is the crowds, I think that these three building blocks are pretty good at getting us started with it. So basically we do crowdsourcing, we do digital phenotyping, and we do something which is a pretty bleeding edge approach, which is Consumeromics, which means basically analyzing small physical pieces of you. There is a lot of technology now appearing on this front, and I'll be talking a bit more about that later. Again, I'm just explaining here how I actually got to creating these slides. So once I was done with these three building blocks, I realized that there is a unifying theme here that we haven't been giving too much thought about, and that is essentially data. So all of this relies on data. You can get data from a lot of places, including those kind of cool platforms that Olga was just talking about. But nonetheless, we have a real issue with data when we are starting to talk about sort of planetary level crowdsourcing approaches. We just simply do not have enough data, and we cannot rely on this kind of individual small scale user studies. Okay, back to data. So the whole arc of data, we have to have a way to access people's personal data while the people actually retaining the ownership of that data. And for that reason, we have partnered with an organization called MyData. MyData is originally actually from Finland. The real roots of it are even from Oulu, but now it's being coordinated from Helsinki. And it's a massive organization trying to do a real change in how our personal data is being utilized. So now if we think how we do research, we design a study, we collect data, we analyze it, we write a paper, the data gets buried in a USB stick somewhere and it's gone. Whereas MyData is working with governments mostly to bring this whole like a European Union wide back-end interoperability flows so that we would have our data available and we would be able to decide who gets to use that data and how. So when I generate any kind of data in my lives through mobile phones, wearable computing, maybe participating in some studies, even doing some service online, the data would be stored at some kind of data intermediary. And that data intermediary can then manage my data for me, but I get to enjoy the benefits. I get to decide who gets access to the data, and I can even get paid for those people accessing my data, instead of me participating in a study and then that data being used once and never again. So MyData is big on this front. And what we have been doing with this data is then we've been starting with really like a ground up approach. So we're studying people's perceptions on ethics, what are actually some of the concerns that people worry about when sharing their data, etc. And we have an upcoming paper in Kai 21 about this. So basically assessing the ethics and concerns of data in healthcare. And then the sort of second idea, what we have been pondering and trying to work on with this data is that how could we run these really big experiments online? Now, if I try to address a big problem, I'm going to need a bigger sample size than 10,000, or even 100,000. I might want to reach 1 million people for a study. And how do we actually get started doing that? We've been trying to come up with some sort of a distributed crowdsourcing infrastructure that would live on websites instead of these kind of silos where people have to go to. I inserted 3 grim emojis there because people don't like blockchains, but actually our vision involves blockchains in that sense. So please check out the paper if you're interested in that. So back to the pyramid, the building blocks, what I like to think as the fundamental pieces of this precision well-being. Crowdsourcing, we kind of got this. So, and by that, I mean that it's technically doable, and there's a lot of work on this already in the well-being domain and health domain. And how this fits into the puzzle is basically making sense of unknown unknowns. So the story that I told in the beginning, what happened to me, is exactly kind of a use case for this. So we would have a community which has problems, and then we find their solutions to those and actually try to somehow structure that knowledge back to the community or other people to find solutions to their problems. So what are sort of group specific challenges and resources if we map this to the well-being definition? And then the scientific value of this kind of work of trying to, for example, reach everyone who suffers from low back pain, like the paper I'm citing there. The scientific value comes from cross-referencing this kind of data with the medical doctors and practitioners, because then both of the communities learn from each other. So it's really just a new way for doing research in the healthcare domain, where the traditional ways still rely a lot of, they involve a lot of manual work, papers, telephone calls, annual follow-ups, but we can also reach a lot more people if we just go to the forums and communities who suffer from these diseases. There's a lot of startups around this as well now, where people are simply telling their life stories in text format, and then they are developing NLP algorithms to parse these kind of challenges and resources. Happily, I've forgotten all of the names of them. Maybe there's Stuff That Works. StuffThatWorks.com is one of those new startups, which was pretty interesting on this sense. And Patients Like Me, sites like those. And we have ongoing work, for example, on Parkinson's disease and mental well-being in higher education, where we're really just trying to collect like a structured knowledge basis of what are the ways that people cope with these conditions and what are the unique challenges of these conditions that, for instance, doctors might not be aware about. But it doesn't have to be something like, well, Parkinson's disease, that's again a disease. But then mental well-being, that's not actually a disease. Mental well-being, I mean, you might be doing excellently and you still have something to say about mental well-being. Like, what are the unique resources you have in your life that cause you to be 11 out of 10 every single day? So these are just really nice topics to gather information about and then teach also the respective caretakers. Then digital phenotyping, we kind of got this too. We have a lot of tools and platforms these days available for doing digital phenotyping, which is essentially building multiple different information streams or data streams about you, and then using those to cluster you into different groups. So we know what kind of people constitute a certain group with a specific phenotype. Active people, age, gender, everything that we can measure about you, and then just using that to cluster people into groups, because groups are highly similar in this way, and then the similar groups hypothetically have similar ways of dealing with their lives. It could be used for making recommendations for those groups, basically. And to this end, it's not only mobile phones that work really nicely. So we have this pretty slick looking high-end wearables these days, like the Oura Ring. I have one here, which is not in my finger because I'm charging it right now. But these also collect pretty effortlessly really nice data over longer periods of time, and they're really fashionable. So people are happy to wear them for months, even years, instead of these 2-week user studies that we often have to be satisfied with, when we do it with some clunkier devices. So really the opportune time for all of this is now, because we're slowly starting to have these devices that people actually want to have instead of they have to have for a study. And these gizmos track a lot of really nice data about our health. And they're good at making recommendations already runtime. But really the key here is that we want to get access to this data somehow. And they offer APIs for it. So what if somehow through that My Data movement, we're going to be able to access all of these vaults of data that people are already collecting about themselves? That would be really like the future vision and a gold mine for us as researchers in this sense. This is the Oura ring, O-U-R-A ring. And yeah, we are working with the Oura company, actually. The Oura company started here in Oulu. Their science team lead is our collaborator, and we have just recently actually gotten funding for doing some work on sleep and how sleep could be affecting low back pain. And we're using Oura rings for these studies. So then again, concretely back to what we are doing instead of this vision. So we have been doing stuff with Parkinson's disease and mobile phones, trying to find different phenotypes of Parkinson's disease patients and show how medication works for them. And then we are also doing this sleep and low back pain. We're doing effect on sleep on cognitive abilities and things like this. And again, here is where the sort of well-being approach starts to bubble up. So it's not only about disease, and in fact, of course, it's not at all about disease necessarily, because cognitive abilities are something that all of us have, and it fluctuates around the day, and sleep will affect every single one of our cognitive abilities. So we could, again, try to figure out how to sleep better on a group level instead of this individual level necessarily. Low back pain is very common. It's not something that is necessarily seen as a disease. 80% of people have low back pain at some point in their lives. And it's not a disease for everyone. It's a really serious condition when it gets serious. But for many of us, it's simply a nuisance, which makes it more of a well-being issue. But there is evidence now slowly bubbling up that sleep affects low back pain also. And we're trying to look into this in a more scalable way as well. So we have built these mobile applications that send daily notifications to do surveys about your back pain, etc. And we are combining this on the Oura cloud backend to the Oura data so that we can see really carefully like what aspects of your sleep might actually affect your pain and how. And then the cool stuff, the Consumeromics. What would we be able to do if we tap into this really bleeding edge technologies that a variety of companies are now developing? So we have this direct to consumer genomic testing. We have in Finland, we have a couple of startups who are doing blood tests, and they give accompanying apps to you, and they are hoarding all this data, of course, to themselves. But of course, we are hoping that 5 years from now, we are able to tap into all of this data through the big shift in ownership of this data. So these companies would be able to offer the service, but the actual data ownership, even if the ownership is at the companies, people would have the chance to share this data with researchers. Now, since we do not have this access yet, and I doubt that these companies are very happy to give it, obviously we have our own researchers also who are doing this same kind of research. So I'm giving a free shout out here to this sort of omics work that researchers here at Oulu are doing. So we are partnered with researchers from the local biocenter, and they are doing something interesting with exosomes. And exosomes are, as described by this gentleman here, they're like little mind-reading balls of life. So for example, we could develop a wearable device that reads your exosomes from your sweat and gives an exact reading of how stressed you are during that day and what's going on in your body. And this way you could build like a wearable device, which is a far more accurate measuring device, like mirroring all of the aspects of your life rather than just a few. And even it's not even just a few, but it's a lot of things that these things can measure. But it's a different level when you can start to analyze actual little pieces of you on that accuracy. Now, this is where I am also on thin ice. This is not my expertise, not at all. This is simply something that we're trying to do with these hardcore biology researchers who know what they're actually talking about. So I'm just connecting the dots here. What we are actually doing with these researchers is we're trying to combine the expertise of our respective research centers so that we would be able to crowdsource these samples without bothering folks too much. So usually they have a biobank. They have a cohort of 20,000 people somewhere in the UK. We have our own cohort here in Oulu. But we want to get more. We want to, of course, offer these services to the common folks roaming on the streets. And that means that we need to get their blood. We need to get their spit samples. We need to get something of them. We need to be able to analyze little bits of their body, just very unintrusive, right? But we need to be able to do that somehow. We need to do it so that it's simultaneously feasible, because we obviously want to actually do something concretely instead of write theoretical papers, but also something that would be beneficial enough to put it in practical terms to be funded by somebody. So it needs to be beneficial for the society within a few years. And then there is this interesting branch of thought play that we're doing is the incentive models. So right now, when we're doing this kind of a custom crowdsourcing solutions, we either beg people to participate or we pay them a bit to participate. Now, if we want to get 100,000 people to participate into some research project like this, I don't think we can actually pay them. 10 euros per person for 100,000 people, no, it doesn't sound like it's going to happen anytime soon. So we have been also devising with the economics department and the Oulu Business School this kind of new incentive models, which essentially would tie the biobank into post hoc rewarding of the participants should this biobank lead into major medical breakthroughs. So for instance, this exosome research, I believe there are companies pouring literally billions of euros to this research in hopes of finding new kind of breakthroughs, because the exosomes can guide where, for instance, a certain medical compound ends up in your body when it's taken. So you could develop a pill that you swallow it, that all the sort of active ingredients in that actually go to a specific body part in your body or an organ. And there's a lot of money in this. So we might be able to create this new incentive models for people to participate, which is also very interesting to think about. And in practice, we would try to do something like this first. So this is a picture of a real men's toilet in Finland. But the interesting part here is that it's got a digital screen. So what we could do is we could take this concept and refactor it into some kind of a, basically a public toilet that would double as a crowdsourcing booth where you give those little samples from your body, and then you download the application with your respective code with you when you leave it. And then it connects you to the research. And our initial ideas revolve around detecting pre-diabetes and the effect of pre-diabetes on your cognitive abilities. So we would basically have just a mobile application that tracks your lunches, tracks what you eat, analyzes that using AI, then sends you throughout the day via experience sampling cognitive tests. And we would be able to detect pre-diabetes using this kind of crowdsourcing approach. And diabetes is huge in Finland. And that way, again, it connects to the well-being rather than treatment. We don't treat diabetes. We try to detect pre-diabetes before anything serious happens, and then nudge the person to the correct direction that, by the way, there's something odd going on in your body. Now you have to take care of your body before you become a patient. So this is our sort of approach that we're trying to do. But obviously this is right now going at the stage where we're simply trying to write funding applications for this. So this is nothing we're doing at the moment. This is something we are writing to a document at the moment that we want to get funding for this. These are basically the ideas that we've been boiling here. I want to show a quote that I'm particularly a fan of. No one knows everything, everyone knows something, and all knowledge resides in humanity. I think this is a beautifully put sentence about how we can start to model the knowledge that all of us contain. Knowledge is not something that is in the heads of the few, but it's in the heads of everyone, and we just need to find a way to connect the dots somehow. And that somehow is these blocks in my head. So we make sense of the resources and challenges, we cluster people, and then we connect the sort of subjective data to objective data about who we really are. And that is the omics, because we cannot change our biology that easily, at least. Before we go, I want to turn your attention to a couple of papers that just gives a really brief scheme of what else we do. So we 3 papers this year, which are about crowdsourcing design feedback, and then this My Data work, and then information presentation on machine learning fairness. And finally, we have one workshop there, which is now accepting submissions. So if you are interested in architecture and understanding sort of human scale spaces, that is something that I would very happily see people submit more papers to. So we still have a week of time to submit. And I'm thinking that I've done my 30 minutes now, or even a bit more. So I'm happy to conclude it here. And thank you for your attention. Thanks.